Part 5, A Second Life. Vatan zama za da vatan yam. Kada vatan da param maram kushala yama. I am a patriot and I love my country, and for that I would gladly sacrifice all. Chapter 23. The Girl Shot in the Head, Birmingham. I woke up on 16th October, a week after the shooting. I was thousands of miles away from home, with a tube in my neck to help me breathe and unable to speak. I was on the way back to critical care after another CT scan and flitted between consciousness and sleep until I woke properly. The first thing I thought when I came around was, thank God I am not dead. But I had no idea where I was. I knew I was not in my homeland. The nurses and doctors were speaking English, though they seemed to all be from different countries. I was speaking to them, but no one could hear me because of the tube in my neck. To start with, my left eye was very blurry, and everyone had two noses and four eyes. All sort of questions flew through my waking brain. Where was I? Who had brought me there? Where were my parents? Was my father alive? I was terrified. Dr. Javid, who was there when I was brought around, says he will never forget the look of fear and bewilderment on my face. He spoke to me in Urdu. The only thing I knew was that Allah had blessed me with a new life. A nice lady in headscarf held my hand and said, Assalamu alaikum, which is our traditional Muslim greeting. Then she started saying prayers in Urdu and reciting verses of Quran. She told me her name was Rihanna and she was the Muslim chaplain. Her voice was soft and her words were soothing, and I drifted back to sleep. I dreamed I wasn't really in hospital. When I woke again the next day, I noticed I was in a strange green room with no windows and very bright lights. It was an intensive care cubicle in the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Everything was very clean and shiny, not like the hospital in Mingora. A nurse gave me a pencil and a pad. I couldn't write properly. The word came out wrong. I wanted to write my father's phone number. I couldn't space letters. Dr. Javid brought me an alphabet board so I could print to the letters. The first words I spelled out were father and country. The nurse told me I was in Birmingham, but I had no idea where that was. Only later did they bring me an atlas so I could see it was in England. I didn't know what had happened. The nurse wasn't telling me anything, even my name. Was I still Malala? My head was aching so much that even the injections they gave me couldn't stop the pain. My left ear kept bleeding and my left hand felt funny. Nurses and doctors kept coming in and out. The nurses asked me questions and told me to blink twice for yes. No one told me what was going on or who had brought me to the hospital. I thought they didn't know themselves. I could feel that the left side of my face wasn't working properly. If I looked at the nurse or doctors for too long, my left eye watered. I didn't seem to be able to hear from my left ear, and my jaw wouldn't move properly. I gestured to people to stand on my right. Then a kind lady called Dr. Fiona came and gave me a white teddy bear. She said I should call it Junaid, and she would explain why later. I didn't know who Junaid was, so I named it Lily. She also brought me a pink exercise book to write in. The first two questions my pen wrote were, why have I no father? And my father has no money. Who will pay for all this? Your father is safe, she replied. He's in Pakistan. Don't worry about payment. I repeated the questions to anyone who came in. They all said the same, but I was not convinced. I had no idea what had happened to me and I didn't trust anyone. If my father was fine, why wasn't he here? I thought my parents didn't know where I was and could be searching for me in the chalks and bazaars of Mingora. I didn't believe my parents were safe. Those first days, my mind kept drifting in and out of a dream world. I kept having flashbacks to lying on bed with men around me, so many that you couldn't count, and asking, where is my father? I thought I had been shot, but I wasn't sure. Were these dreams or memories? I was obsessed by how much this must be costing. The money from the awards had almost all gone on the school and buying a plot of land in our village in Shangla. Whenever I saw the doctors talking to another, I thought they were saying Malala doesn't have any money. Malala can't pay for her treatment. One of the doctors was a Polish man who always looked looked sad. I thought he was the owner of the hospital and was unhappy because I couldn't pay. So I gestured at a nurse for paper and wrote. Why are you sad? He replied. No, I'm not sad. Who will pay? I wrote. We don't have any money. Don't worry, our government will pay, he said. Afterward, he always smiled when he saw me. I always think about solutions to the problem, so I thought maybe I could go down to the reception of the hospital and ask for a phone to call my mother and father, but my brain was telling me, you don't have the money to pay for the call, nor do you know the country code. Then I thought I need to go out and start working to earn money so I can buy a phone and call my father so we can all be together again. Everything was so mixed up in my mind. I thought the teddy bear the Dr. Fiona had given me was green and had been swapped with a white one. Where's the green teddy? I kept asking, even though I was told over and over there was no green teddy. The green was probably the glow of the walls in the intensive care unit, but I am still convinced there was a green teddy. I kept forgetting English words. One note to the nurse was a wire to clean my teeth. It felt like something was stuck between them. And I meant floss. Actually, my tongue was numb and my teeth were fine. The only thing that calmed me was when Rihanna came. She said healing prayers and I started moving my lips to some of them and mouthing. Amin, our words for Amen, at the end. The television was kept off except once when they let me watch MasterChef, which I used to watch in Mingora and I loved, but everything was blurred. It was only later I learned that people were not allowed to bring in newspapers or tell me anything as the doctors were worried it could traumatize me. I was terrified that my father could be dead. Then Fiona brought in Pakistan newspaper from the week before, which had a photograph of my father talking to General Kayani with a shawl figure sitting at the back next to my brother. I could just see her feet. That's my mother, I wrote. Later that day, Dr. Javid came in with his mobile phone. We are going to call your parents, he said. My eyes shone with excitement. You won't cry, you won't weep, he instructed me. He was gruff but very kind, like he had known me forever. I will give you the mobile and be strong, I nodded. He dialed the number, spoke, and then gave me the phone. There was my father's voice. I couldn't talk but because of the tube in my neck, but I was so happy to hear him. I couldn't smile because of my face, but it was as if there was a smile inside. I will come soon, he promised. Now have a rest. In 2 days we will be there. Later he told me that Dr. Javid had also ordered him not to cry, as that would make us all sadder. The doctor wanted us to be strong for each other. The call did not last long because my parents did not want to tire me out. My mother blessed me with prayers. I still presume that the reason they weren't with me was my father didn't have the money to pay for my treatment. That's why he was still in Pakistan, to sell our land in the village and also our school. But our land was small and I knew our school buildings and our house were rented. So what could he sell? Perhaps he was asking rich people for a loan. Even after the call, my parents were not completely reassured. They hadn't actually heard my voice and were still cut off from the outside world. People who visited them were bringing conflicting reports. One of those visitors was Major General Ghulam Qamar, head of military operations in SWAT. There's good news coming from the UK, he told my father. We are very happy our daughter had survived, he said. Because now I was seen as a daughter of the nation. The general told my father they were carrying out door-to-door searches throughout SWAT and monitoring the borders. He said that they knew that the people who had targeted me came from a gang of 22 Taliban men, and that they were the same gang who had attacked Zahid Khan, my father's friend, who had been shot 2 months earlier. My father said nothing, but he was outraged. The army had been saying for ages that there were no Taliban in Mingora and they had cleared them all out. Now the general was telling him that there had been 22 of them in our town for at least 2 months. The army had also insisted Zahid Khan was shot in Family Feud and not by the Taliban. Now they were saying I had been targeted by the same Taliban as him. My father wanted to say, there were Taliban in the valley for 2 months. They wanted to kill my daughter and you didn't stop them. But he realized it would get him nowhere. The general hadn't finished. He told my father that although it was good news that I had regained consciousness, there was a problem with my eyesight. My father was confused. How could the officer have information he didn't? He was worried that I would be blind. He imagined his beloved daughter, her face smiling, walking around in lifelong darkness, asking, Abba, where am I? So awful was this news that he couldn't tell my mother, even though he is usually hopeless at keeping secrets, particularly from her. Instead, he told God, This is unacceptable. I will give her one of my own eyes. But then he was worried that a 43 years old his own eyes might not be very good. He hardly slept that night. The next morning, he asked the major in charge of security if he could borrow his phone to call Colonel Junaid. I've heard that Malala can't see, my father told him in distress. That's nonsense, he replied. If she can read and write, how can she not see? Dr. Fiona has kept me updated, and one of the first notes Malala wrote was to ask about you. Far away in Birmingham, no, not only could I see, but I was asking for a mirror. Mirror, I wrote in the pink diary. I wanted to see my face and hair. The nurses brought me a small white mirror, which I still have. When I saw myself, I was distraught. My long hair, which I used to spend ages styling, had gone, and the left side of my head was not at all. Now my hair is small, I wrote in the book. I thought the Taliban had cut it off. In fact, the Pakistan doctors have shaved my head with no mercy. My face was distorted, like someone had pulled it down from one side, and there was a scar to the side of my left eye. How did this Who did this to me? I wrote, my letters still scrambled. What happened to me? I also wrote stop lights as the bright lights were making my head ache. Something bad happened to you, said Dr. Fiona. Was I shot? Was my father shot? I wrote. She told me that I had been shot on a school bus. She said two of my friends on the bus had also been shot, but I didn't recognize their names. She explained that the bullet had entered through the side of my left eye, where there was a scar, traveled 18 inches down to my left shoulder, and stopped there. It could have taken out my eye or gone into my brain. It was a miracle I was alive. I felt nothing, maybe just a bit satisfied. So they did it. My only regret was that I hadn't had a chance to speak to them before they shot me. Now, they'd never hear they would never hear what I had to say. I didn't even think a single bad thought about the man who shot me. I had no thoughts of revenge. I just wanted to go back to SWAT. I wanted to go home. After that, images started to swim around in my head, but I wasn't sure that was my dream. What was a dream and what was reality? The story I remember of being shot is quite different from what really happened. I was in another school bus with my father and friends and another girl called Girl. We were on our way home when suddenly two Taliban appeared dressed in black. One of them put a gun to my head and small bullet that came out it entered my body. In this dream, he also shot my father. Then everything in dark, I am lying on a stretcher and there is a crowd of men, a lot of men, and my eyes were searching for my father. Finally, I see him and try to talk to him, but I can't get the words out. Other times, I am in a lot of spaces, in Jinnah Market in Islamabad, in China Bazaar, and I am shot. I even dreamed that doctors were Taliban. As I grew more alert, I wanted more details. People coming in were not allowed to bring their phones, but Dr. Fiona's always had her iPhone with her because she is an emergency doctor. When she put it down, I grabbed it to search for my name on Google. It was hard, as my double vision meant I kept trying in the wrong letters. I also wanted to check my email, but I couldn't remember the password. On the fifth day, I got my voice back, but it sounded like someone else. When Rihanna came in, we talked about shooting from Islamic perspective. They shot at me. I told her. Yes, that's right, she replied. Too many people in Muslim world can't believe a Muslim can do such a thing, she said. My mother, for example, would say that they can't be Muslims. Some people call them Muslims, but their actions are not Islamic. We talk about how things happen for different reasons. This happened to me, and how education for female, not just male, is one of our Islamic rights. I was speaking for my right as a Muslim woman to be able to go to school. Once I got my voice back, I talked to my parents on Dr. Javeed's phone. I was worried about sounding strange. Do I sound different? I asked my father. No, he said. You sound the same, and your voice will only get better. Are you okay? He asked. Yes, I replied, but this headache is so severe I can't bear the pain. My father got really worried. I think he ended up with the biggest headache than me. In all the calls after that, he would ask, Is the headache increasing or decreasing? After that, I just said to him, I'm okay. I didn't want to upset him and didn't complain even when they took the staples from my head and gave me big injections in my neck. When are you coming? I kept asking. But then they had been stuck in the army hostel at the hospital in Rawalpindi for a week with no news about when they might come to Birmingham. My mother was so desperate that she told my father, if there is no news by tomorrow, I will go on a hunger strike. Later that day, my father went to see the major in charge of the security and told him. The major looked alarmed. Within 10 minutes, my father was told arrangements would be made for them to move to Islamabad later that day. Surely, there they could arrange everything. When my father returned to my mother, he said to her, "You are a great woman. All along I thought Malala and I were the campaigners, but you really now know how to protest." They, they, moved, they were moved to Kashmir House in Islamabad, a hostel for members of parliament. Security was still so tight. When my father asked for a barber to give him a shave, the policeman sat with them all the way through so the man couldn't cut his throat. At least now they had their phones back and we would speak more easily. Each time Dr. Javid could call my father in advance to tell him what time he could speak to me and make sure he was free. But when the doctor called, the line was usually busy. My father is always on the phone. I rattled off my mother's 11-digit mobile number and Dr. Javid looked astonished. He knew that my memory was fine, but my parents were still in darkness about why they weren't flying to me. Dr. Javid was also baffled as to why they weren't coming. When they said they didn't know, he made a call and then assured them the problem was not with the army but the civilian government. Later, they would discover that rather than do whatever it took to get my parents on the first plane to Birmingham to join their sick daughter, the Interior Minister Rehman Malik was hoping to fly with them so they could have the joint press conference at the hospital, and it was taking some time to make the arrangements. He also wanted to make sure they didn't ask for political asylum in Britain, which would be embarrassing for his government. Eventually, he asked my parents outright if this was their plan. It was funny because my mother had no idea what asylum was, and my father had never even thought about it. There were other kind things on his mind. When my parents moved to Kashmir House, they were visited by Sonia Shahid, the mother of Shiza, our friend who had arranged the trip to Islamabad all, for all us Kushal schoolgirls. She had assumed they had gone to UK with me. And when she found they were still in Pakistan, she was horrified. They said they had been told there were no plane tickets to Birmingham. Sonia brought them close as they had left everything in SWAT and got my father the number of President Zardari's office. He called and left a message. That night, the president spoke to him and promised everything would be sorted out. I know that it's like to be kept from one's children, he said, referring to his years in jail. When I heard they would be in Birmingham in 2 days, I had one request: bring my school back. I pleaded to my father, if you can't go to SWAT to fetch it, no matter, buy new books for me, because in March it's my board examination. Of course, I wanted to come first in class. I especially wanted my physics books because physics is difficult for me. I needed to practice numericals as my math is not so good and they are hard for me to solve. I thought I would be back home by November. It ended up being 10 days before my parents came. Those 10 days I spent in hospital without them felt like 100 days. It was boring and I wasn't sleeping. I stared back at the clock in my room. The changing time assured me I was alive. I saw for the first time in my life I was waking early. Early morning I longed for 7 a.m. when the nurse would come. The nurse and Dr. Fiona played games with me. QEH is not a children's hospital, so they brought over a play coordinator with games. One of my favorite was Connect 4. I usually draw with Dr. Fiona, but I couldn't beat everyone else. The nurses and hospital staff felt sorry for me in a far off land away from my family and were very kind, particularly Yama Chaudhry, the jolly director of operations, and Julie Tracy, the head nurse, who would visit and hold my hand. The only thing I had with me from Pakistan was a beige shawl, which Colonel Junaid had given to Dr. Fiona as a present for me. So they went clothes shopping to buy me things. They had no idea how conservative I was or what a teenage girl from the Swat Valley would wear. They went to Next and British Home stores and come back with bags of t-shirts and pajamas, socks and even bras. Yama asked me if I would like shalwar kameez and then I nodded. What's your favorite color? She asked. Pink was of course my reply. They were worried I wasn't eating, but I didn't like the hospital food and I was worried it was not halal. The only thing I would eat there were the nutritional milkshakes. Nurse Juicy discovered I liked cheesy what's it, so brought me those. What do you like? They asked me. Fried chicken, I replied. Yama discovered that there was a halal Kentucky fried chicken at small house, so would go there every afternoon to buy me chicken and chips. One day she even cooked me a curry. To keep me occupied, they bought me a DVD player. One of the first movies they got me was Bend It Like Beckham. Thinking the story of a sick girl challenging her cultural knobs and playing football would appeal to me. I was shocked when the girls took off their shirts to practice in sports bras, and I made nurse switch it off. After that, they bought cartoons and Disney movies. I watched all three Shrek movies and The Shark's Tales. My left eye was still blurry, so I covered it when I washed, and my left ear would bleed, so I had kept putting in cotton wool balls. One day, I asked a nurse, "What is this lump?" Placing her hand on my tummy, my stomach was big and hard. I didn't know why. "It's top of your skull," she replied. I was shocked. After I started to speak, I also walked again for the first time. I hadn't felt any problem with my arms or legs in bed apart from my left hand, which was stiff because a bullet had ended up by my shoulder, so I didn't realize I couldn't walk properly. My first few steps were such hard work, it felt like I would run 100 kilometers. The doctor told me I would be fine. I just needed a lot of physiotherapy to get my muscles working again. One day, another Fiona came, Fiona Alexander, who told me she was in charge of the hospital press office. I thought this was funny. I couldn't imagine Swat Central Hospital having a press office. Until she came, I had no idea of the attention it attracted. When I was flown from Pakistan, there was supposed to be news blackout, but photographs were leaked from Pakistan for me leaving and saying I was going to UK, and the media soon found out my destination was Birmingham. A Sky News helicopter was soon circling above. As many as 250 journalists came to the hospital from as far as Australia and Japan. Fiona Alexander had spent 20 years as a journalist herself and had been editor of the Birmingham Post, so she knew exactly how to feed them material and stop them trying to get in. The hospital started giving daily news briefings on my condition. People just turned up wanting to see me. Government ministers, diplomats, politicians, even an envoy from the Archbishop of Canterbury. Most brought buckets of some of them exquisitely beautiful. One day, Fiona Alexander brought me a bag of cards and toys and pictures. It was Eid al-Azha, Big Eid, our main religious holiday, so I thought maybe some Muslims had sent them. Then I saw the postage stamps from 10th October, 11th October, day before, and I realized it was nothing to do with Eid. They were from people all over the world wishing me speedy recovery, many of them school children. I was astonished and Fiona laughed. "You haven't seen anything yet," she told me. There were sacks and sacks more, about 8,000 cards in total, many just addressed Malala Birmingham Hospital. One was even addressed the girl shot in head, Birmingham, yet it had got there. There were offers to adopt me as if I had no family and even a marriage proposal. Rehanna told me that thousands and millions of people and children around the world had supported me and prayed for me. Then I realized the people had saved my life. I had been spared for a reason. People had sent other presents too. There were boxes and boxes of chocolates and teddy bears of every shape and size. Most precious of all were perhaps the parcel that came from Benazir Bhutto's children Bilawal and Bakhtabar. Inside were two shawls that had belonged to their late mother. I buried my nose in them, try and smell her perfume. Later I found a long black hair on one of them, which made it even more special. I realized that the Taliban had done was make my campaign global. While I was lying in that bed, waiting to take my first steps in a new world, Gordon Brown, the new and special envoy for education and former Prime Minister of Britain, had launched a petition under the slogan, "I am Malala," to demand no child to be denied schooling by 2015. There were messages from head of states and ministers and movie stars, and one from the granddaughter of Sir Olive Cromwell, the last British governor of our province. She said she was ashamed at not being able to read and write Pashto, although her grandfather had been fluent. Beyonce had written me a card and posted a photo of it on Facebook. Selena Gomez had tweeted about me, and Madonna had dedicated a song. There was even a message from my favorite actress and social activist, Angelina Jolie. I couldn't wait to tell Moniba. I didn't realize I wouldn't be going home.